A year ago this week, one of the most horrendous crimes took place along this stretch of Old Mohawk Road east of Eugene. A 28-year-old woman and her 3 small children were brutally shot.
Diane Downs was born on the 7th of August, 1955 in Phoenix, Arizona, and was the only child in the family. Her parents, Wesley Fredrickson and Willa Dean, met at a young age, and after her mom got pregnant, they got married. When her mom found out about the pregnancy, she was shocked. She didn't need this child. When Diane was born, her parents didn't even know what to do with her. They weren't going to love her or take care of her. The girl came from a family with strict conservative values, and her parents forbade her to wear fashionable clothes and did makeup, which made her the object of frequent bullying. Diana was short and thin, with short blonde hair and big blue eyes. She was quiet, but that only made her more vulnerable to bullying. At school, classmates beat money out of her, forced her to eat her lunches outside, and even left her alone in the dark. During her teenage years, Diane became a rebel. She felt rejected and offended by society, and this feeling was deeply ingrained in her soul. At school, Diane began to bully other children. Her classmates began to fear her. She believed that her experiences of suffering and bullying gave her the right to be tough. She graduated from Moon Valley High School in Phoenix, where she met her future husband, Steve Downs. Despite her parents' disapproval, Downs continued the relationship. The parents had to come to terms with Diane's behavior and the fact that their daughter had resumed a relationship with Steve. In the end, they approved of their marriage, but insisted that the girl finish school first. After high school, her parents sent her to Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College in Orange, California, but she was expelled after a year for disorderly behavior and returned to her parents' home in Arizona. Shortly after the start of the new year, Diane was caught by a teacher drinking alcohol in the hallway. This was the last straw for the college administration. On the 13th of November, 1973, Diane married Steve. "I didn't marry Steve for love," the woman later said. "I married Steve to get away from my family." They settled in a small house in Springfield, Oregon. In 1974, they had their first daughter, Christy, and 2 years later the second, Cheryl. Diane took up parenting, but it can't be said that she was good at it. Her entire upbringing was based on prohibitions. If the daughters did something wrong, she just punished them or beat them, Steve later said. At first, the quarrels between Diane and Steve were just minor altercations, but over time they became more intense. They argued about everything from whose turn it was to wash the dishes to deeper issues like trust and commitment. Despite their best efforts, they have not been able to find a way to reconcile their differences. Diane felt that Steve was holding her back, while Steve thought that she was too reckless and impulsive. In 1978, Diane had an affair with Steve's best friend, Mark Seiger. Diane and Mark have been best friends since she met Steve. During the marriage, Diane began to feel something more than just friendship for Mark. She tried to ignore her feelings, but they wouldn't go away. After a while, the girl found out that she was expecting a child. No matter how much Diane assured Steve that she was faithful to him, he did not believe her. In 1979, when a boy named Danny was born, the man portrayed a loving husband for several more months, but after making sure that his son did not look like him at all, he left home. They officially divorced in 1980. He tried not to cross paths with Diane because he was offended. Nevertheless, once a month he saw his children and spent time with them. Steve helped his ex-wife financially, but being a single mother with 3 children turned out to be a very difficult task, so Diane began looking for a part-time job. She was looking for different jobs, but she didn't stay at them for a long time and quit because she didn't like anything. Her friends had not been able to have a child for a long time, and therefore were looking for a surrogate mother who would give birth to a baby for them. Diane offered them her candidacy, saying that she had excellent health and would be happy to help them realize their dream for a tidy sum. But she lied, saying that she had no health problems. Back in 1979, doctors identified signs of psychosis in her and recommended that she undergo treatment. However, the woman ignored their insistent requests, continuing to live as if nothing had happened. Friends who didn't know any of this gladly accepted Diane's offer, and on the 8th of May, 1982, the woman gave birth to a healthy girl named Jane. The sleepy silence of a warm May night in 1983 in the city of Springfield was broken by the loud, incessant horns of a car that stopped next to a local hospital. The paramedics rushed to the car. First, they saw a distraught-looking woman who was screaming that her children needed help. 9-year-old Christy, 7-year-old Cheryl, and 3-year-old Danny were in the car. They were in serious condition. Christy and Cheryl were unconscious, and only Danny showed faint signs of life. Christy suffered serious injuries, and was on the verge of death when she was rushed to the hospital. In fact, the doctor who examined her really thought she was already dead, and he had to examine her again to make sure she was still alive. Despite everything, Christie's life was saved by the efforts of Dr. Steve Wilhite, who worked tirelessly to bring her to her senses. He described her condition upon arrival as one of the most critical he had ever seen. Christie's blood pressure was dangerously low, and it turned out that she had suffered a stroke, which made her unable to speak. Their mother, Diane, was also injured. There was a bandage on the woman's left arm, but no one paid attention to her, because her life was not in danger. While doctors were fighting for the lives of Christie, Cheryl, and Danny, their mothers had their bandage changed. Already at this stage, the doctors noticed such a strangeness. The woman was not eager to find out how her children felt. Instead, she launched into a confusing story. Sometime later, Diane was informed of the news about the children. Her eldest daughter, Christie, was supposed to make a full recovery. Danny will remain alive, but due to injuries, he will be permanently paralyzed from the waist down. Cheryl could not be saved. The woman reacted to these words even more strangely than before. She maintained an extraordinary composure and calmness, but when the doctor told her about her children, the detachment on her face was replaced by disappointment, the nurse later told the police. Cheryl was a very enthusiastic and curious child who asked a lot of questions. Shortly before she died, Cheryl told her grandparents' neighbor that she was afraid for her life. However, no one paid much attention to her, and in the end, the worst happened.
I haven't been through it with my psychologist. It's very hard, it's very tearful. There are a lot of memories that, I don't know. A lot of people, when something traumatic happens to them, they suppress it immediately. I kept those memories because I knew that I was the only person that was going to be able to tell them what happened when we got to the hospital.
When Danny and Christie's condition became better, the police asked the woman to tell them in detail what happened. Christie said that she did not remember the attacker. She said that she remembered how she and her mother were driving in the car, and then she ended up in the hospital. Both authorities and hospital staff believed Downs was too calm for someone who had just experienced something so horrific, and her story changed when she was questioned by investigators. Diane said that she and her children went to visit her friend. Diane packed a bag with snacks, games, and a few favorite toys. The children were happy to spend the day at Sarah's house, playing with her new puppy. At about 9 p.m., they drove home, but at some point an unknown man jumped out in front of the car. He was acting very strangely. Diane stopped, got out of the car, and asked what was wrong with him. The man demanded her car keys and money. He took out a gun, pointed it at the car, and started shooting. She threw the house keys into the bushes and drove with the children to the hospital. Soon, an image of the suspect appeared on all TV channels. According to Diane, he had narrow eyes, a big nose, and long hair. As the ballistics examination showed, he was armed with a .22 caliber revolver. By the way, Diane also had a gun. She kept one gun in the trunk, the other at home. None of them matched the murder weapon. In addition, there were no traces of gunpowder on the woman's hands, so she was excluded from the list of suspects. The excitement around the case is so great that 3 of the best detectives in the state were appointed to it at once: Dick Tracy, Map West, and Doug Welch. The attack looked completely senseless and brutal, which made it hard for them to believe that the perpetrator had chosen the car by accident. According to detectives, the woman knew the attacker, but did not want to give his name. They assumed that the woman did not want to name the potential perpetrator because she was connected to him by something, perhaps an affair. It is quite logical that the father of the children, Steve Downs, became the first on the list of suspects. Only at that time he was living in another city, and on the evening of May 19th he was visiting his friend. To the standard question about what kind of weapons were in their family, the man replied, "I didn't have it," and Diane had a .22 caliber revolver. The detectives immediately picked up on this topic and asked Steve the question of whether Diane was capable of harming her own children. The man confidently stated that his ex-wife would never do that. Steve's words didn't bother the detectives at all. On the contrary, their guess was soon confirmed by Diane's daughter, Christie. The fact is that when Diane came to visit her daughter, the girl avoided and ignored her mother, and she began to develop a panic attack. Detectives decided to take a closer look at Diane and search the woman's house. There they managed to find a diary, which later became the main piece of evidence in this case. It was from him that the detectives learned that Diane had dozens of men on the side. The last person on the list was a certain Robert Knickerbocker, a former colleague of the woman, with whom she resumed communication shortly after the birth of her daughter, in 1982. Diane was obsessed with Robert, so she made every effort to charm the man. According to Diane, Knickerbocker, who lived in Arizona, where Diane is from, with his wife, did not like children. She had 3 of them. According to prosecutors, Diane, desperate to be with Knickerbocker, tried to get rid of her own children. For Diane, it was a real obstacle. These kids were a burden, and she didn't see any way she could get this guy to Oregon while she had the kids, Detective Welch said. In April 1983, Robert confessed to his wife of infidelity and announced his desire to leave for another woman. But Knickerbocker's wife could not part with him, telling him that she would forgive everything if he stopped communicating with Diane. What happened? I'm so confused. What could she have said or done to make you behave like that? I talked to you this morning for the last time. It broke my heart when I heard from you. Don't call or write ... I'm still thinking about you. And you keep telling me to leave and find someone else. You've got to be kidding, Diane wrote in her diary. To tell the truth, he did not want to accept and raise 3 other people's children at all, which he told Diane about, after which he cut off all ties with her. The woman was devastated. No one can stand in my way to happiness, not even my children. It's a pity, but I have to do this, Diane wrote in her diary on the 17th of May, 1983. The detectives still had no direct evidence against Diane. The only person who could provide them was Christy. However, the girl stopped talking because of the stress she suffered. Christy was admitted to the hospital, where she was recovering under the constant supervision of a psychiatrist and a neurologist. Christy laid motionless like a doll, her big blue eyes staring into the void, reflecting the abyss of despair. Her best friend, Carla, came to see her every week with her parents. They read books to her, told her funny stories, but Christy didn't react. They did not lose hope. They believed that her silence was a defense mechanism, and that someday she would speak again. Gradually, Christy began to draw, then write, and finally she spoke again. Her voice was low and uncertain. It took 6 months of difficult rehabilitation for the child to regain the power of speech. When the girl was able to speak again, she was questioned by the police. There was no man there. Mom did it, Christy admitted. Diane Downs was arrested on the 28th of February, 1984.
Diane Downs wanted more than anything else was to have children. She got her wish, but her dream turned into a twisted tragedy when she was sentenced to life for shooting her children because her boyfriend didn't.
At that time, the woman was pregnant by another partner. I got pregnant because I miss Christy, and I miss Danny, and I miss Cheryl very much, she told reporters at the time. I will never see Cheryl on earth again, and you can't replace children, but you can replace the effect they have on you. And they give me love, they give me satisfaction, they give me stability, they give me a reason to live and a reason to be happy, and it's gone. They took it away from me, but children are so easy to conceive. Diane was in custody awaiting trial. The woman remained true to her habits. She started an extensive correspondence with many men. Downs especially singled out Rennell Woodfield among them, a serial maniac serving a life sentence for 21 episodes. I find him a pleasant and charming person. Time in the cell flies by unnoticed while I reread his letters and answer them, Diane said in an interview. She began to justify his actions, saying that he did it because of his pain or suffering. She even began to feel responsible for his actions because she believed she could change him. She wrote the first letter full of questions about his life, about how he became what he became. According to the woman, his letters were full of depth and sincerity. He shared his thoughts about his childhood, about how his injuries shaped his personality. Instead of seeing him as a monster, Diane saw a man who suffered and sought understanding. With each new letter, their bond grew stronger. Diane began to justify his actions, convincing herself that he was not to blame for his crimes. Before the trial, Downs underwent a psychiatric examination, during which the woman revealed a large number of mental disorders of a narcissistic, hysterical, and antisocial nature. However, their presence is not a sufficient reason for declaring the defendant insane. The trial began in January 1985. Diane refused to admit guilt, continuing to insist on the version that she and her children were victims of an unknown perpetrator who could not be identified. Curiously, her ex-husband also sided with the woman, according to whom she could not harm her children. The prosecutor described Diane as a woman who was obsessed with relationships with the opposite sex. Her whole world revolved around one idea: to add another name to her diary. Children were just a hindrance to her. After that, the prosecution invited witnesses who saw a red Nissan Downs driving towards the hospital at a speed of about 10 kilometers per hour in the late evening of the 19th of May, 1983. This clearly contradicted the words of the woman who claimed that she was rushing to the hospital. In the courtroom, Diane began to experience strong emotions. She became more and more agitated, and she became aggressive. The judge tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't listen. "Do you think I'm guilty?" she screamed. "No, it's not my fault." She answered the questions very loudly and aggressively, continuing to deny her guilt. The judge tried to control the process, but Diane continued to scream and cry. In the end, the judge was forced to take Diane out of the courtroom because her behavior became dangerous to others. She was sent to a detention cell until the next day. The next day, Diane was handed over to the court again, but she also did not admit her guilt. But the testimony of Diane Downs, Christie's daughter, had the greatest effect on the jury. They were so emotional that sobs could be heard in the courtroom during her story. Christie testified in court that her mother shot her and her siblings. She said her mom stopped the car, went to the trunk, took something out, and then put her hand through the window and shot her brothers and sisters. Authorities believe Diane then shot herself in the arm. Despite her young age, Christie showed incredible courage when she testified against her own mother and helped secure her conviction. Her courage to speak out against Diane was widely covered in the media for a while. In fact, long before she gave her testimony in court, many people who followed the case anxiously hoped that she would speak up and tell them what really happened. At the time, her upcoming testimony made headlines in several newspapers. "I love you anyway," Mom Christie said at the end, looking into Diane's eyes and making her shed a few stingy tears. The trial lasted 31 days. During it, the prosecutor's office even completely reconstructed the crime. A mock-up of a car and mannequins of children were brought to the courtroom. These scenes shocked those present in the courtroom. "I think Diane is the type of woman who can kill and then sit down and have lunch next to your body," Detective Doug Welch said. The story has become so real and cruel that even her last supporter, her ex-husband, has changed his opinion about Diane Downs. "I wish Oregon had the death penalty." Steve Downs said after seeing the reconstruction, Diane Downs was found guilty of all charges against her. On the 17th of June, 1985, she heard the verdict: life in prison plus 50 additional years. The sentence could not be mitigated by stories about a difficult childhood, nor the absence of traces of gunpowder on her hands, nor the fact that the police could not find the murder weapon. Diane didn't behave in the best way in prison. She complained about the conditions of detention, clashed with her cellmates, and in 1987 she completely escaped, somehow managing to climb over a 5-meter-high barbed wire fence. But the woman enjoyed freedom for only 10 days. She was caught and transferred to a maximum security prison. For the first time, Diane received the right to apply for parole in 2010. Her application was rejected. She made a second attempt in 2020, also unsuccessfully. The next hearing is expected in 2025. "I am innocent. I did not commit this crime. Over the years, I've been telling you and the rest of the world the truth. The truth is that an unknown man attacked me and my children," Diane Downs said in a recent interview. Stephen did not take custody of either his daughter or his son. Christy and Danny were adopted by prosecutor Fred Hugo, the same man who acted as prosecutor in their mother's case. Over the years, the children have worked hard to overcome the trauma of their past and build a bright future for themselves. They followed their hobbies, improved their education, and built strong relationships with Hughie's family and others around them. Danny's leg mobility has never recovered, but according to sources, he is married and lives a happy life doing programming. He has no children. Christy is now a married woman and lives in Oregon with her husband. Moreover, Christy also became a mother and experienced the joy of raising her own children. In 2005, she welcomed the birth of her firstborn son. She later gave birth to a daughter, whom she named Cheryl after her late sister. Despite the difficult circumstances she faced as a child, she managed to build a happy and successful life for herself and her family. Becky Babcock was born when Diane was incarcerated. She was later adopted by another family. "I've known all my life that I was adopted," Becky said. "I can't remember a specific moment when my mom or dad said you're adopted, but when I was about 8 years old, I started asking questions about adoption. It's just that some small part of me felt like I was looking for something else. I was looking for that blood connection. I never had any questions about my biological father," Babcock continued. "It was mostly about my biological mother. What did she look like? What was she doing?" After Babcock found out about her infamous mother, she decided to get in touch. "The first letter I wrote to Diane, I must have written 100 times," she says. "I was nervous. It was scary. I wanted to treat her not as a mother, because I had a mother just as someone who felt the pain and emptiness I was feeling at the time." She answered her very quickly. However, the girl decided to tear up that letter and no longer remember her biological mother.